If you're looking at Mercedes and Peugeot, now Stellantis, and BMW and the European auto sector, you can't not pay attention to what Tesla's doing. So that was the beginning of it for me. And also seeing how much reverence there was between Volkswagen and Tesla. They're impressed. And there's a lot of things that Tesla have done over there and around the world, which have been impressing the entire industry. A lot of things which haven't as well. But with that, and it's just been such a story, the growth, particularly with the share price, but also what they've been able to achieve fundamentally, to me, is very impressive.
Going back to your '07 Steve Jobs presentation, Elon's not quite as polished of a presenter. I remember watching the Cybertruck unveiling, and when they actually unveiled it, I thought that the shell that they rolled out the Cybertruck, I thought that was fake. I thought they were going to lift that off and there'd be a pickup truck underneath. And I'm like, wait, this can't be the actual truck. And then they tried to the unbreakable glass, famously, that was breakable. Anyway, so not quite Steve Jobs.
He is and he isn't, Meb. I mean, he has incredible reach, and he has a similar sort of halo, if you will, between his shareholders and himself, if not stronger. And he's not an idiot. A lot of people like to say he is, or a crook. I've mentioned this before. People have such different views about this man that I try to steer clear of that debate, because you can't really get anywhere with that. You can't. It's hard to learn from somebody where you might be wrong. It's hard to teach if all you're doing is battling about this man's personal character. Although some of my close friends in the industry have a very negative view of his personal character. I'm not speaking out of turn, but Chris Bloomstrand, with whom you've spoken, Jim Chambers, with whom you've spoken, they're not big fans. And I try not to go there. I try to focus more on the economic reality of automaking and the likelihood of expanding that business into other lines. I have to say I was a bit thrown off last week when I saw that Elon was going to push his board to top him back up to a 25% stake in the company, which was kind of right, something that Jim or Chris might have expected. I thought that was overdoing it. Elon, as you all know, as everyone knows, sold a bunch of shares to arguably finance his Twitter purchase. But, he got some prices in the 300s. I think the average price of what he sold was at $275. We're down at 205 or 210 now. And he's telling his board, if you don't give me that 25% stake, I might take all the good stuff out, do it somewhere else. The AI, the robots, the dojo. Very threatening comments.
I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite like that before.
I hadn't. That's really pushing it. And when you do the math and you look at, it's very easy on Bloomberg to go through and say how many stock sales he made, what he owns, how many options he has left to exercise. What he's effectively asking for is almost precisely the same amount of stock he sold. About 140 million shares, effectively, the way it works out. And what do you do if you're the board? That's the bigger question. What do you do? I mean, if Tesla lost Elon Musk, that's it. Game's over. Share price falls in half at least. The whole halos are gone. So you almost have to acquiesce. But that's a big chunk of concession to make to keep this guy around. And you'd think he'd have enough incentive already, given how much of a stake he already has. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. That's not why I'm short Tesla, but that certainly added fuel to the fire.
So why should someone be short today, or said differently, not be long? And is there a price which you would be long, going back to our earlier part of the discussion?
To me, it makes perfect sense. But when I mention it on Twitter or in our blog, I get lambasted by the faithful. But I don't think that the car business itself is really worth that much.
It's just the robo-taxi? It's the what?
What they did was incredible. The Model Y is incredible. How on earth someone can come up with a car and sell more than anyone else in the world? I think they were ahead of Corolla for a few quarters. What the Tesla investors, I think, mistaken. I can be wrong. I've tried to go through and believe me, I've tried to find where can I be wrong on this thing? What needs to happen for me to be wrong? But people say, oh, they're going to sell 20 million cars by 2030, or maybe they revise that down to 15 or 10 by now. There's no way they'll do either of those numbers. You don't sell that many cars just because you hope that's what happens. Automaking is a tough business. It's tough. The Two most successful in the world started in 1937 to 38. Coincidentally, Volkswagen and Toyota both started then. And after world wars and all sorts of crises, these two have fought their way up to owning 10 or 12% market share globally in 80, 90 years. That's how far they've gotten. And they're not idiots. Toyota's production system basically changed the whole world of engineering. These guys have come up with great things. These are not idiots. Everyone at Tesla wants to think that everyone else is an idiot, except for the folks that got jobs at Tesla. It's just not true. If it were an industry that was prone to sort of first mover or winner take all, then Toyota would have been the monopolist 15 years ago or longer. But you and I and everyone else that buys cars have a million reasons why we buy cars. Utility, the aesthetic of the car, how much it costs. There's a million things that go into the mix of why we buy a car. And some of us want EV, some of us don't. As you mix all this in, you realize that Tesla doesn't have the models. It has one that sells. Volkswagen has across its groups over 90 different models, different brands, and they have refreshes of those models every few years to get people to come back in. We aren't getting the same refreshes. We aren't getting the same models. We get the Cybertruck 4 years late, and I would argue, and this is more of a personal perspective, I think it's going to have trouble selling. They'll sell them to the fanboys here in year one. They're not going to sell 250,000 of those a year.
I think them not doing a traditional pickup truck was such a whiff.
Oh, it's a complete whiff. The Rivian's a better truck, and it's I'm a Midwest boy and live down south. I have a truck. Everyone knows has a truck. No one's buying a Cybertruck. I mean, yes, some folks in California will, and someone that wants to drive that thing. It's kind of a novelty.
Does it all hinge on the mass market Redwood?
It does hinge on the mass market, which if we had this conversation a year ago, and I did with many, that was something expected to be news on in the second quarter last year. So in terms of modeling what the business looks like going forward, Meb, and I have been, I think, fairly objective and also fairly positive on the likelihood of EVs becoming a bigger mix of total sales. It's nowhere close to what the fanboys expect in terms of the ICEs disappearing and us all driving EVs. And we've seen evidence of that now, where firstly, at all the traditional manufacturers, they're just not getting the demand that people thought. People don't necessarily want an EV because it's going to show up, particularly in some climates and some regions. But Tesla's seeing the same thing. Starting over a year ago, they had to start discounting. People don't want to buy them anymore. The only ones that sell are the Y anyway. And so this whole notion that Tesla investors had, that Tesla can make as many cars as it want at whatever price and generate whatever margins they want. It just, in 2023, we've all learned that was completely wrong. They've had to lower prices and lower prices again and lower prices again in nearly every region geographically. Consequently, their profit margins, which people thought were sustainable at forever at 21 levels, turned out to be, because we're in the middle of a chip shortage and they had the stuff and so they could sell whatever product they wanted to for whatever price. And it turns out that they're now less profitable than 3 or 4 other automakers. Stellantis is doing 400 basis points better margins than they are. Not the kind of thing that a Tesla shareholder wants to pay attention to. And so what Elon is very good at is shifting their focus on something else. And that has been, in 23, it's been AI, Dojo, robots. And let's try to come up with some other sort of undefinable upside that can be the thing that lures folks in or keeps them around. And now, again, unlike Chris or Jim, I do think that this guy's worth money. I do think there should be a value to the Musk option. Well, I mean, what on earth? It's incredible what he's done. The market share he's taken, it's a success story. I mean, and meanwhile, he's landing rockets on the moon and bringing them back. And who knows what he'll come up with next.
Let's see. Stock is, let's call it 200 and change. Market cap at 650.
Higher. You gotta go diluted.
Okay. So down
A lot of diluted shares.
Down about 50% from the peak-ish. Where's Drew a buyer?
It's going to depend on the day, Meb. I mean, I think that the auto business is maybe worth $50, $75 a share, but I don't think Tesla's worth that little, because I do think there's value to the Musk option. Energy, AI, Tesla bots. How do you define that? Do you pay $50 billion more in market cap because you want to own Elon Musk? You pay $5 billion? Do you pay $75 billion for something that's not profitable yet, but it's Elon Musk running it, so it must work? And the mistake, I believe, and I've tried to be nice about this. I've tried to help people to sort of see clearly without being offensive. But everyone wants to believe that, hey, look what Apple did. That's what Tesla's going to do. And they give, I mean, Apple was on its knees. It had to borrow $150 million from Microsoft in 1998. Amazon was on its knees. It fell 95% from the tech bubble to 2003 before it changed its business model, pivoted, and figured that AWS might be a nice profit machine. But just because we're citing these epically wonderful, game-changing, world-dominating businesses and assuming that's going to happen to Tesla, well, that's what the market's kind of done. So, and you can do the math on what market shares are for Tesla and how many cars are going to sell and how much that might grow or not grow and slap earnings multiples on them even in the out year. You're not getting to a very, very big number in terms of what the car business is worth, which means if that car business is worth 50 or even $100 billion, which it's not in my view, you're paying $600 billion for everything else that might happen. And that's a lot of call option value. And as we have had things happen to us, delays in FSD or launches of the Cybertruck or no announcements about this Model 2 that everyone's been waiting on, which, by the way, is not a sure thing, right? It's success, nor is its profit. It's not going to generate the same kind of profits that people had hoped it would. We're seeing what's happened to gross margins and operating margins of Tesla since they had to cut prices to sell these cars. I mean, the fascinating thing to me, we had huge earnings downgrades from last year at this time. I had temporarily become constructive on Tesla because it had sold off for all the wrong reasons. He just bought Twitter. Everyone's negative about him doing that. You get the stock pressure down. It gets down to $100 a share. And I actually wrote for the FT, hey, the fraud's gone, guys. I might think it's worth less in many years, but it's not worth this. This it's gone down to here, the fraud's gone, and now it's popped back up, and now it's coming back off. It's got a massive market cap again. People are paying $500-600 billion for the Musk option, and he's threatening to leave, take his toys and go home.
I mean, I think it was Elon yesterday where he said something about, I stand by my prediction that if Tesla executes extremely well over the next 5 years, that the long-term value could exceed Apple and
Saudi
Aramco, which puts it, the 10 trillion club, like the first, that'd be the first stock to hit 10 trillion, which
no, I mean, if the stock had a $50 or $75 billion market cap and he was saying those things, those grandiose things, you say, oh, you know what? God, this Elon, he's so smart. Let's bid this thing up a bit and own the call option. People have effectively already given Tesla the market cap as if it's a foregone conclusion that they will be a market dominating business without any evidence of them doing so. In fact, we've had contrary evidence over the last 15 months. Missing earnings, missing revenues, growth has slowed. The Model 2 should have been out a year ago. Cybertruck came out finally, but even Musk himself said, oh, by the way, this is not going to be that profitable. We're going to need some time to get it up to the production level that generates the profit that is required from it. I don't think they're going to get there. And to me, it's the weird thing, Meb, is it's obvious. And this is not insights that everyone else can have. We see that prices are being cut. We see margins are falling. We see earnings expectations are falling. If you had told me in December 31st of 2022, hey, this stuff's going to happen fundamentally, I would have said, well, maybe it is worth $100. But the stock was up over 100% in the midst of all this bad news because people started shifting their focus, as Elon does very well. Oh, no, it's an AI company. Oh, okay. Never mind that they're arguably behind Waymo and 3 other groups in terms of the development of FSD, level 5 autonomous driving, which is a whole nother debate. Never mind that there might not be the demand for these things that people think there will be. It's hard for me to imagine wanting to have an AV, but maybe. And we have had evidence not only at traditional manufacturers, but at Tesla itself, that the demand for EVs is not as robust as many had hoped. And that, sure, places like Norway buy a ton of them, but that's because everywhere doesn't have a multi-billion-dollar sovereign wealth fund that pulls oil out of the ground that can be used to subsidize EV purchases like Norway does. And that's exactly what's happened there. You get a break on VAT, you get a break, you don't have to pay parking, you don't have any road tax, and you get $10,000 ish to buy the thing. Okay, I'll have an EV, but that's not the way the world's going to work, and we're seeing that people don't want it. They'll eventually get there. I was mentioning earlier, I get us up to 50% by 2030. I'll probably start revising that back a bit because even I have been disappointed by EV growth. It's going to be tough to see fundamental news which justifies the share price. And it's possible that here in 24, we have a year with very low earnings growth, if growth at all. If they have to keep cutting prices, they won't grow earnings. But even revenue growth's falling. So what are you going to pay for that? And in my view, you can't get there.
So you're a buyer at 50?
No, I think that's what the auto business itself might be worth. Now, I do think there's going to be value in maybe something that Elon hasn't even talked about yet. He is that kind of guy. I'd be careful not to be short him, but right now the assumptions are that almost for this wonderful, perfect world, and the people buying the stock they are true believers. It's very religious. And if those are the ones making the price, I've tried to caution them as nicely as I can. Guys, have a look at this. Or at least tell yourself, what would you need to see? I've said this to the Bears, or to the Bulls. Tell yourself what you would need to see to change your mind. What kind of fundamental development? Maybe the robotaxis don't take off, or maybe they don't introduce a Model 2, or maybe margins go to here, or maybe sales go to whatever it is. Just predefine that. So if it does happen, you can exit. And those that say, no, I'm just going to own it forever, that as long as there's a contingent of folks that are still speaking like that, well, the stock's got downside.
All right, $50. You heard it here. You never know with these sort of things. I always think about like him, like buying SpaceX or Starlink, and like all of a sudden it's this conglomerate of like really incredible assets.
Yeah, well, this is the Musk option. He can put it all together.